AITA for refusing to pay for my in-laws' dinner. They have long been accustomed to considering our money as common. My husband and I have been married for almost 10 years now, and for the most part, we have a pretty good marriage. There's love, there's laughter, there's the usual bickering over who forgot to take the laundry out of the washer or which one of us left the fridge open, but overall, I would say we're a good team. One of the things that has always brought us closer together is our shared love of food. Neither of us would ever claim to be experts. We couldn't tell you the difference between a Michelin star and a James Beard Award if our lives depended on it, but we both get really excited about trying new places, discovering hidden gems, and just generally enjoying good meals together. Luckily for us, we live in an area that has a pretty thriving food scene. There are tons of small, independently owned restaurants, creative fusion spots, and little hole-in-the-wall joints that are always popping up. Since we both have jobs that pay well and don't have kids to budget for, we've developed a bit of a habit over the past few years where, if it's Friday night and neither of us feel like cooking, we just go out. No planning necessary, we just pick a spot and go. It's honestly one of my favorite parts of our life together. At some point, we started inviting our parents to join us from time to time. My parents live about half an hour away, his parents are closer to 45 minutes. We see both sets fairly regularly, birthdays, holidays, and sometimes just casual visits when we're in each other's areas, but these dinner invitations became something of a fun tradition. Maybe once every 3 or 4 months, we would pick a restaurant we thought they'd enjoy, extend the invite, and then of course, because we were the ones inviting, we would cover the bill. It was never explicitly discussed that we would always pay, but it just felt like the natural thing to do. We were the hosts, we were treating our parents to a nice night out, and frankly, we could afford it. That system worked fine for a long time. I enjoyed treating my parents and his parents to places they might not have discovered on their own, and since we both come from families who aren't particularly adventurous when it comes to food, it felt like we were expanding their horizons a bit. It was fun. The shift happened a few months ago, when his parents invited us out for dinner near their house. It was unusual for them to do that, they're not particularly spontaneous, and it's rare for them to initiate plans that don't revolve around a birthday or holiday. But we figured, why not? They had apparently found a local place they liked and wanted to share it with us, and we were happy to check it out. It wasn't the kind of place we would have chosen for ourselves, but we were happy to go along for the ride. Dinner itself was perfectly pleasant, nothing extraordinary, but we had a nice time. Then the check came. Without so much as a glance at the bill, my mother-in-law slid it across the table to my husband, like it was just assumed he would take care of it. There was no pause, no awkward moment, no, should we split it, or, we got this one. It was as automatic as if the server had handed it directly to him. I remember my husband's eyebrows going up a little, but he just pulled out his card and paid without a word. I thought it was a little odd, but it wasn't an expensive meal, and I assumed it was a one-off. Maybe they had forgotten their wallet or just assumed we'd cover it since we usually do when we invite them out. No big deal. Then it happened again. A few weeks later, his parents invited us out to a restaurant we had actually taken them to once before, a moderately priced but very nice spot we really like. I was a little surprised they suggested it, because they had mentioned at the time that it was pricier than what they would normally go for. But I figured they must have really enjoyed it. Dinner was nice, conversation was fine, and then, just like before, the check arrived and his mother slid it over to my husband without hesitation. No discussion, no eye contact, just a silent handoff. At this point, I was starting to feel a little weird about it. These weren't invitations anymore, they were setups. They were choosing the restaurants, inviting us, and then just assuming we would pay. And to be clear, it's not that we can't afford it. We can. But it felt off. It wasn't just the money, it was the expectation. There's a big difference between hosting and being treated like a walking credit card. The real breaking point came more recently. My husband was chatting with his mom on the phone, and at some point, he mentioned, very casually, that I had received a small award at work. It was the kind of thing where you get your name announced at a staff meeting and maybe a certificate to hang in your office, nothing earth-shattering, just a nice little pat on the back. His mom immediately seized on this and said we should all go out to celebrate. But not just anywhere, she suggested a very fancy, high-end restaurant that's well known in our area. It's the kind of place where even appetizers push $50 and the entrees are triple digits. I was sitting nearby and heard her make the suggestion, and without really thinking, I leaned over and quietly asked my husband, "Are we going to have to pay for this too?" He immediately stiffened, gave me the absolute harshest glare, and ended the call much faster than he normally would. As soon as he hung up, he rounded on me, calling me rude for even asking that. He said we could afford it, his parents couldn't, and that I was being incredibly selfish for making a big deal out of something that wasn't a big deal. I told him it wasn't about the money, it was about the assumption, the fact that they keep inviting us out and just expect us to pay every single time. I told him it felt manipulative, especially using my insignificant work award as an excuse to get a fancy night out. He wouldn't hear it. He said they weren't using us, they just wanted to celebrate me, and since we have more disposable income than they do, it was only right for us to pay. I pointed out that my own parents aren't exactly rolling in money either, and yet they never pull this. He had no answer for that. Later, after talking to his dad, he came back and said I had embarrassed his parents and made them feel like moochers. Apparently, they were very upset, and now they want an apology. To smooth things over, my husband suggested, no, actually, he insisted, that we take them to the fancy restaurant they wanted to go to, but this time, not under the pretense of celebrating me. Just as a gesture to make up for how I made them feel. I don't think I did anything wrong by questioning why we're suddenly responsible for every meal his parents want to have. I don't think I was rude for quietly asking my husband, in private, if we were going to be expected to pay. I definitely don't think I should have to grovel and apologize for not wanting to bankroll his parents' dining habits. But now I'm stuck between standing my ground and making peace, and I honestly don't know which is the right thing to do. AITA. Update 1. After the initial blow-up over the fancy restaurant and the fallout from my supposed rudeness, I spent a few days quietly stewing. The tension in the house was palpable, and Jason and I were barely talking beyond the essentials, passing comments about the dog, the weather, or what we needed from the grocery store. Every conversation felt like walking a tightrope, and the air was so thick with unspoken resentment that I could feel it pressing down on my chest. I realized pretty quickly that this wasn't just about a meal, or even a series of meals. This was about something deeper, something that had been quietly festering under the surface for years without me ever realizing it. And I knew if we didn't figure out what that was, this wasn't going to be a fight we could just sweep under the rug. It was the kind of thing that could corrode the very foundation of our marriage. So one evening, after an awkwardly silent dinner at home, I told Jason we needed to talk, really talk, about the situation with his parents. Not just about the money, but about boundaries in general. I framed it as calmly and neutrally as I could, even though my insides were tied in knots. I told him I wasn't trying to start another fight, I just needed to understand where he stood and where I stood, because it was clear we were on two completely different pages. At first, Jason rolled his eyes and told me I was making a big deal out of nothing, that I was blowing one uncomfortable dinner out of proportion. He said they were his parents, they weren't perfect, but they weren't trying to manipulate us either. I didn't let it drop this time. I told him this wasn't something I was willing to brush off and that I needed him to be honest with me, not defensive, not dismissive, just honest. There was a long, uncomfortable silence where he wouldn't meet my eyes. I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers fidgeted with the hem of his sleeve, and I knew something was coming. And then, like someone flipping a switch, the dam broke. Jason didn't just tell me the truth, he unloaded it. It turned out that his parents' behavior, the invitations, the silent bill sliding, the entitled assumption that we would always pay, none of it was random or thoughtless. It was intentional, deliberate, and it had been building for years. According to Jason, shortly after we got married, his mother sat him down and delivered a speech that, even now, makes my blood boil just thinking about it. She told him that since they had raised him, paid for his education, supported him through every scrape and stumble in his youth, it was now his turn to support them. That was the natural order of things, at least in her mind. She didn't frame it as a suggestion or a gentle hope for occasional help. No, Karen made it clear that Jason's money, which now meant our money, was, at least partially, theirs. They had invested in him, and now it was time for the return on that investment. Jason admitted he didn't fully agree with it at the time, but instead of pushing back, he let it slide, telling himself that it would only be small things here and there. A bit of help with car repairs. Covering a dinner once in a while. Little favors that, on their own, didn't seem worth fighting over. But the more they saw him say yes, the more comfortable they became treating our money like a shared family pot. When we took them out for dinner early in our marriage and paid, they saw that as confirmation that Jason had understood his role. It wasn't gratitude they felt, it was entitlement. Over time, they stopped waiting for invitations and started extending their own, confident that the end result would be the same. They would eat well, enjoy themselves, and leave the bill for us to handle, just like they believed was their right. The part that made my stomach turn was when Jason admitted they had even complained to him, repeatedly, that I was making things harder than they expected. Whenever I casually mentioned splitting a bill or suggested a more modest restaurant, they saw it as me being difficult, greedy, and ungrateful. According to them, I didn't understand how family worked. Real families, in their view, shared everything, and that meant my salary was just as much theirs as it was mine. They saw my reluctance to pay for their meals as a personal insult, proof that I wasn't fully committed to being part of their family. And Jason, caught between the two sides, always chose to quietly placate them rather than confront the fundamental unfairness of it all. The worst part was how easily Jason admitted that, deep down, he agreed with them, or at least, he had for a long time. He had absorbed the belief that he owed them, that taking care of them financially was a duty, not a choice. When we got married, that sense of duty simply extended to include me. I was part of Jason's team, therefore my money was part of Jason's money, and Jason's money was, in their eyes, a family resource. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I sat there, numb, trying to process how I had been married for almost a decade to someone who never thought it was necessary to tell me that his parents saw us as their retirement plan. All the quiet generosity, all the times I paid a bill without thinking twice, all the small indulgences, they had never seen those as kindnesses. They saw them as obligations being fulfilled. And the fact that I hadn't known any of this, that Jason had kept it from me because he knew how furious I would be, felt like a betrayal I couldn't fully articulate. I told Jason, calmly, but very clearly, that this had to stop. It wasn't up for negotiation. I told him I understood that helping families sometimes is part of life, but there's a world of difference between helping out when there's a need and being treated like an open wallet. I told him that if he couldn't set clear boundaries with his parents, I wouldn't be participating anymore. No more dinners, no more silent check sliding, no more pretending we were just being generous hosts. If they wanted to go out to eat, they could either pay their way or stay home. Jason looked stricken, but he didn't argue. I think, on some level, he knew this day was coming. Maybe he even wanted me to be the bad guy so he wouldn't have to be the one to break the news to them. Either way, I made myself crystal clear, this wasn't something I would compromise on. His parents, by the way, still think I'm a terrible ungrateful daughter-in-law. Update 2. After a few weeks of simmering tension that seemed to permeate every corner of the house, I found myself at a breaking point. Jason and I were technically speaking again, but it was the kind of brittle, surface-level communication where every word was weighed and measured, every interaction felt like stepping onto a frozen lake you weren't sure would hold your weight. We were polite, but distant, and the unspoken presence of his parents, and everything they represented, was like a third person living with us. I could feel it even when we were alone. It sat in the silence between us, in the way he would glance at his phone after every conversation with his mom, in the way I would tense up every time he mentioned visiting them. It was unsustainable. It was exhausting. And I realized I was done playing this weird, passive-aggressive game where everyone was talking about me and around me, but never to me. If this was going to blow up, I wanted it to happen face-to-face. I wanted to have an actual conversation, without Jason running interference, without anyone sugarcoating things to spare my feelings or to protect some warped version of family harmony. I decided to talk to my in-laws directly. I didn't want a big dramatic confrontation, no raised voices, no accusatory finger-pointing. I just wanted to lay my cards on the table, hear what they had to say, and make it clear where I stood. So I invited them out for coffee. Not to a fancy brunch spot, not to a trendy cafe they could use to score another free meal, just a small, quiet coffee shop where we could sit, drink, and talk like adults. And, of course, I paid for everyone, because after all these years, it had become second nature to just automatically reach for my wallet whenever I was in their presence. I started by calmly explaining that the new tradition, where they would invite us out and then quietly expect us to pay, wasn't something I was comfortable with. I told them it felt dishonest, like a bait-and switch, and that if we were going to go out together, I wanted it to be because we all wanted to spend time together, not because they saw us as their free pass to places they wouldn't go on their own dime. I expected some resistance. I expected a few defensive remarks, some performative surprise, maybe even a little guilt-tripping about how they were just simple folks who didn't understand fancy money rules. What I didn't expect was for Karen to wave it off like it was old news. She didn't deny it, didn't act embarrassed, didn't even try to explain herself. She just smiled, that infuriatingly condescending smile she always uses when she's about to drop some patronizing pearl of wisdom, and said something like, "Oh, I thought Jason told you." She said it so casually, like it was common knowledge, like it was the kind of thing everyone knew and I was just the last one to catch up. And that's when the real bombshell dropped. According to her, this wasn't just her idea. It wasn't even just Jason's parents working this little scheme. It was a collaborative family effort, both sides, mine and his, united in the belief that since Jason and I had the best salaries, it only made sense for us to take on what they called family entertainment. Apparently, there had been a family gathering months ago, one I had missed because of work, where all the parents sat down together and came to this brilliant conclusion. My parents. His parents. A nice little summit where they decided that Jason and I, with our comfortable dual incomes and our lack of kids, were the logical choice to be the financial safety net for every meal, every outing, every celebration. They had all agreed that we wouldn't mind, because we were foodies, and because we liked going out anyway. They treated our discretionary spending, our little hobby of exploring new restaurants, as proof that we had endless money to burn, so why not burn some of it on them? I sat there, stunned, while Karen calmly sipped her latte like she had just given me the weather report. The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. It wasn't just that they were using us, it was the fact that they had all conspired together, turned our own parents into accomplices, and no one had ever thought to tell me. I had been the only one in the dark, blindly swiping my card over and over again, thinking I was being generous when, in reality, I was just playing a role they had assigned me without my knowledge. And Jason knew. That was the part that cut the deepest. Jason had been at that meeting. He had sat there, listened to them divvy up our money like it was a shared family bank account, and said nothing. He didn't push back. He didn't object. He didn't tell me. He just let it happen, because he didn't want the conflict. Every time I questioned why we were paying for yet another meal, every time I asked if we could split the check, every time I even hesitated, he knew exactly why it was happening and he let me think I was the crazy one for questioning it. The hits kept coming. Karen explained, still with that maddening, breezy tone, that my own parents had been using the system too, just in a slightly more subtle way. They would invite us out, offer to let us choose the restaurant, and then, like clockwork, one of them would forget a wallet or step away just as the check arrived. It was all part of the same unspoken agreement. We were the kids with the good jobs, so we were the kids who paid. They weren't just mooching off us, they were doing it with each other's full knowledge and approval. I left that coffee date in a daze, my head spinning with betrayal layered on betrayal. It wasn't just Jason. It wasn't just his parents. It was everyone. My own parents, the people I had always assumed were on my side, had been treating me like a walking ATM, all while smiling in my face and pretending they respected the life I had built. I drove home with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, wondering how I could have been so blind for so long. That night, I told Jason everything his mother had said. To his credit, he didn't deny any of it. He looked ashamed, but not surprised, which somehow made it even worse. It was clear he had known all along that this was bigger than just his parents, and he had chosen silence over honesty every single time. That silence, that deliberate omission, felt like a betrayal I wasn't sure I could fully forgive. We are now working with a family therapist, trying to untangle all the layers of secrecy, resentment, and misplaced loyalty that have built up between us. I've set strict financial boundaries with my parents, and even though they were offended, especially my mom says we raised you, I'm no longer ready to be the family ATM. Update 3. After the disastrous coffee meeting with my in-laws and the devastating realization that my own parents had been in on the scheme all along, I hit a wall emotionally. There's only so much betrayal a person can process at once before your brain just forces you into survival mode. I wasn't sleeping well, I felt like I was walking around in my own house as a guest, and every time I looked at Jason, all I could see was someone I didn't fully know. It wasn't just the fact that he had gone along with it, it was how long it had been happening, how deeply woven into the fabric of our marriage it was, and how easily he had decided I didn't need to know. That kind of deception, and the casual ease with which both sets of parents had participated, left me feeling like my whole sense of security was built on sand. So I took a step back. I didn't pack my bags and leave in a dramatic storm out, but I did start to create some breathing room. I went to a lot of yoga classes, took long drives with no real destination, spent time at the library just sitting with a book I wasn't really reading, and tried to figure out what my next step was supposed to be. It was during this self-imposed cooling-off period, exactly 1 week later, that the situation went from deeply upsetting family dysfunction to outright madness. It started when Jason got a call while we were sitting in the living room, not talking, just existing in the same space with the television on for background noise. I wasn't paying much attention until I heard the tone of his voice change, the confused, hesitant questions followed by long, awkward silences as the person on the other end of the line kept talking. When he finally hung up, he looked pale, like someone had punched him in the stomach. The call was from the manager of a small, cozy restaurant we had taken his parents to several months earlier, the kind of place where the owner actually remembers regulars and takes pride in knowing their names. It had been a perfectly fine dinner, not particularly memorable beyond the usual pattern of Karen sliding the bill over to Jason like she was passing him a piece of junk mail. But apparently, something happened that night that we were completely unaware of. That evening, after Karen had so gracefully handed the bill to Jason without so much as a glance, she had quietly taken the waiter aside and asked them to add one more bottle of wine to the check. This wasn't some casual afterthought, she had physically pointed to the bottle they had already finished, making sure the same one was added to the bill. The waiter, who was brand new at the time, must have gotten flustered or confused, because the charge for the extra bottle never made it onto the final bill. We paid, none the wiser, and left thinking the evening was over. Fast forward to now, and apparently the restaurant had been conducting an internal review of their inventory and transactions, something they do periodically to make sure their records match up with actual sales. When they found a discrepancy, they pulled the security footage to figure out where the missing charge had come from. And there, in crystal clear clarity, was Karen, my mother-in-law, smiling sweetly at the waiter while she pointed to the bottle and said to just put it on her son's bill. Not their bill, not the table's bill, her son's bill. As if that was some sort of standing order the staff should have already known about. The manager wasn't calling to demand payment, they weren't looking to cause trouble. They were just trying to figure out why the charge never went through and wanted to know if Jason could shed any light on it. Jason, of course, was blindsided. He had no idea this had happened, and even in the current fractured state of our marriage, I could tell his shock was genuine. But when he called his mother to ask about it, to confirm whether this was some misunderstanding or mistake, her response floored both of us. She didn't deny it, didn't apologize, didn't even try to soften the edges of what she had done. She just shrugged it off like it was the most normal thing in the world and said something along the lines of, well, you were paying anyway, so what's the difference? The sheer entitlement of it made my skin crawl. It wasn't just about money at that point, it was about the underlying assumption that our finances, our autonomy, our right to even know what we were paying for, were irrelevant because in her mind, it was all hers to direct. She felt entitled not only to our money, but to the invisible strings that came with it, the right to dictate how much, when, and for what, all without our input or consent. She didn't even see it as wrong, because in her worldview, we existed to bankroll her comfort. Full stop. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Up until then, I had been trying, however shakily, to find some thread of good faith to hold on to. I had told myself that maybe Jason's parents were just clueless, that they didn't realize how their behavior came across. I told myself they were old-fashioned, maybe from a generation that saw adult children as built-in support systems. But this? This was calculated. This was a conscious choice to lie by omission, to manipulate the system in her favor, to knowingly exploit our hospitality without even the faintest trace of guilt. It felt like a switch flipped inside me, from anger to exhaustion, from betrayal to clarity. There was no salvaging this relationship. There was no heartfelt talk that would make me feel safe eating another meal with these people. They weren't just opportunistic, they were actively predatory, and they felt completely justified in it. That night, I packed a bag and left. Not permanently, not with any grand declaration, but with the quiet understanding that I needed to be somewhere else if I was going to have any chance of deciding what came next. I moved in with a friend, someone who had seen my increasingly vague and stressed out texts over the past few months and had already offered their guest room. Being away from the house, from Jason, from the ghosts of all the dinners and the uncomfortable silences and the unspoken betrayals, felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater for too long. Jason called and texted, not constantly, but enough that I could tell he was struggling. He said he didn't know about the incident with the bottle of wine, and deep down I believed him. But that didn't erase the fact that his complicity in everything else had led us here. Whether or not he knew about that specific moment was almost irrelevant, because his broader loyalty to his parents, at the expense of our marriage, had already done the damage. We are in limbo right now, working through issues in therapy, trying to figure out if there is anything left worth saving. But even if Jason and I can get back together, my relationship with his parents, and honestly, even my own parents, may take a long time to recover from. There is a line between generosity and taking for granted, between family support and exploitation, and both sets of parents have crossed it many times. I would be interested to hear your comments on this, what you think about it.